Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
In the news this week, we're talking about how Atlassian dropped the state of DevX results. We're looking at a deep dive into how a Google DeepMind engineer builds context for LLMs. And we're looking a little closer at how Cloudflare is charging crawlers for access to the internet. What do you want to talk about first, Ben?
Oh, I love these stories this week, but the Atlassian one seems pretty big. So let's go ahead and cover their developer survey results.
All right. So Atlassian, a leader in AI engineering and adoption of these new tools, dropped the recent State of DevX report. And we have a look at a quick snapshot of some of the statistics that were included. Obviously, AI adoption being on the rise is something that they are widely covered. But they're talking about how AI tools are producing more value. And according to their report, 68% of developers reported a sizable time savings. Like we're talking about upwards of 10 hours a week using a tool like AI. And that's a pretty big jump from last year's report, where 54% of those developers said that they were experiencing those gains. So, according to Atlassian's report, you're seeing actually a lot of velocity in how engineers are adopting these tools and using them. You might remember from recent weeks, this actually runs contrary to reports even from lead dev, where we hear about how engineers are not seeing these kinds of productive values from tools. So, definitely really interesting to see the competing viewpoints of these surveys. I really recommend folks look closer at them to understand the full story. And with like all of the reduction in time, Atlassian even goes further to quantify this into how much money you can save as an engineer or an engineering leader. In some cases, they are looking at 10 hours a week of inefficiencies. If you have a company with 500 developers, you're looking at like $8 million a year in lost value in terms of waste. Waste, by the way, is going to be a topic we bring up a little bit later today. But Ben, what do you think about this report?
Yeah, that 8 million number is pretty stark. I actually kind of think maybe that is all that adopting AI comes down to. Like, how much time did it save, or how much work hours did it save you versus the amount that it cost you? Because that really does seem to be a good way to evaluate it. But just to be clear, so last year, more than half of respondents to the survey said that they had basically had no measurable improvements from AI. Whereas this year, 2/3 are saying they're saving 10 plus hours using AI. Like, that's a massive, massive jump.
Yeah.
But honestly, like, it actually does kind of resonate with me personally, because I am absolutely saving at least 10 hours a week doing my work. And it's, I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, there's some point where, presumably as this technology matures and gets better, we're all going to start reaching a point where we're capable of doing 2, 3x what we used to do before AI. And I've been thinking about, like, what is actually like leading that to happen, like, just personally for me. And so I figured out there's kind of like two different categories of ways that it's helping. There's like the stuff that I've always done that is now substantially easier. So, I work a 40-hour week. Within that 40 hours, certain number of hours of that work that I've always done is now significantly less than that. But I think the stuff that's actually more important is all the new stuff that I never would have expected to do before AI that I'm now doing in addition to all of the stuff that I already do. So, for example, like here at Dev Interrupted, we're now analyzing research white papers in a fraction of the time that it used to take us to sort of sift through all of these in-depth research articles and like try to come away with interesting insights that we can incorporate into our content. And because it's so much easier now, we have the capacity to not only basically to do this in the first place, but then also to execute it at a scale that just never would have been possible for us. And I think that second category is where we're all going to start feeling that like pressure towards like 2x, 3x of our impact and our output. And I think there's even like potential growth beyond that. Like, it's so cliche to say like a 10x engineer or a 10x knowledge worker, but in many ways, like, I feel like we're actually like starting to see glimpses of that. And my advice is like everything just seems to be accelerating at this point. So like, just strap in and do your best to learn something along the way. Yeah. So our next story, Angie, is about context engineering. So, and I think it's a recent guest, Philip Schmid. So what do we have there?
Oh, yes. So there was this really great blog article came out on Philip Schmid's personal website that we're going to include it in our show notes along with everything else we're discussing in the news. Um, and Philip really goes in depth about what is context engineering and defining it as something beyond just prompting. This article it distills a lot of really brilliant points about how you need to be thinking about preparing context for an LLM. And there were many parts of it that stood out to me just based on my own practices. But, Ben, I know you've been experimenting with this a bit yourself recently. What did you think of Philip's insights?
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna come out and say it. Like, I'm kind of getting to this point where I dislike all of these like so-called prompt engineering guides that I see
Mhm.
everyone making.
Yeah.
So this is really, I think, a really great take on this challenge. But these prompt engineering guides, they like give you a couple of sentences. They lead you to believe that you're going to solve complex problems with them, and then they just leave out a whole bunch of like really important context that is behind it. So they'll say things like, test your entire code base with this prompt, or feed an error log into this prompt and it will debug it for you. Or, as a writer, like write a book like a famous author or something like that. And I mean, those are pretty cool tricks, I think, but they don't really give you like sustainable like problem solving. And the reality is that most of the like actually difficult problems that we solve day to day require a pretty immense amount of context. Like humans are really good at both getting that context, but also knowing when we have to go and acquire additional context. GPTs don't really work that way. Context engineering is like where you should be investing most of your effort. Like we do that here at Dev Interrupted for content research. So we use GPTs to help us gather high quality data artifacts that we then feed back into custom GPTs that we're training for specific purposes. So like I brought up these white papers, like we can use GPTs to extract really relevant data points and then feed those data points into other GPTs that are helping us build content that might span more of an overarching narrative. And I think there's a lot of parallels to how this stuff can be used in software development too. But like the reality is like once you have all that context, like prompting is actually like the easiest part. Like it actually can come down to just a couple of sentences because you've put in all the work to give the context that the model needs. Andrew, like does that match like your recent experiences?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely aligns with some of the things I've been trying. I liked the way that you frame it. It makes it sound almost more like you're arranging it like a factory. Like you put the parts next to each other, they have inputs and outputs, and there's things you expect along the way.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting way of bringing it together because even Philip himself really hammers on the point that context engineer is a system. It's not a string.
Mm-hmm.
A prompt is a string. Context isn't just like a static prompt template that you paste in. Maybe it has some variables. It's an output of something that happens before it, whether that's a defined system that you work and build to create like a rigid structure for what comes downstream, or if it's data sources that are otherwise cleaned up and organized in a semantic way. But the important part is that your context is organized in a way that's intentional. And while you look at it like a factory, I actually look at it more like a classroom. I see it as what is the minimum amount of things that I need to bring into this world, into this classroom for, the people, the agents, the however you want to look at them to come in and understand like what are their goals? What are the tools available to them? What do they need to ask and understand? And ultimately it's like there's a lot of parallels to like organizing a syllabus or preparing for a new school year. You can't throw everything at somebody on the first day and expect them to figure it all out. You have to structure the context and the tools available to them so that they know what to reach for. It's a really different way going beyond just a template string. So I really loved how Philip framed it. We're going to include this in the show notes for y'all to check out as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to give our audience, I think the only bit of prompt engineering advice that you actually need. And that is if you ever have a hard time getting a good prompt for a GPT, just ask it to help you. Like it turns out that these are actually like really great tutors. And anytime that you might be wondering, can I solve this problem with AI? Just have it help you figure out how to solve that problem. So you don't need to download any of those prompt engineering guides out there. Focus on context engineering, and then just get familiar with working with GPTs to improve that process. All right, so introducing pay per crawl, enabling content owners to charge AI crawlers for access. This sounds exciting, Andrew. What's this story about?
Yes, so this is the title of a recent blog post from Cloudflare, from Cloudflare, excuse me, that really kind of opens the door into what the future of the internet and how folks access it might look like. Cloudflare, as you know, infrastructure for the web, it's global CDN, and it's honestly what serves probably most of the websites and services that you interact with on some level. So the impact of Cloudflare makes it perfectly positioned to be the one to solve the AI spam, AI crawler issue plaguing the web. If you've been listening to Dev Interrupted for a while, you know we've been covering this about how AI spammers and crawlers will go through all sorts of different websites, even free and open source projects, right? And scrape huge amounts of data for their training sets or otherwise used in LLM calls. And this is actually bringing a lot of systems to their knees. So Cloudflare is introducing an option for content providers to charge on a domain or a DNS level for access to resources. Because when you remember the HTTP protocol, it has actually ways built in for handling this. There's a little known HTTP response code called 402 payment required. And why this hasn't really seen widespread adoption and use in web specs until today, now Cloudflare is picking up the pieces of the web itself, showing how much of a self-healing system the web truly is to tackle this problem, allowing content providers to connect payment portals directly to AI crawlers so that those AI crawlers could potentially pay for their ingestion of content. It's a really interesting look at how content consumption might change under the hood of everything we use.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever run into an HTTP 402 error. Like, that's pretty wild. Uh,
No,
and I guess if it's only for AI, maybe I never will run into it, even
probably not.
today. But yeah, I mean, I love this story because it's like first we had Anubis and Labyrinth that trapped AI bots in these like endless logic problems. Like if you've been listening to Dev Interrupted long enough, we've covered these stories. But now we have Cloudflare like basically trapping or charging those AI bots to get out of that trap, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Uh, it's also like I think it's also the first usage-based pricing scheme that I've seen that charges AI bots specifically for their use, which is pretty interesting.
Indeed.
But personally, I'm just thinking about this from like the perspective of like maybe information becomes free for humans but costs money for AI, and that actually doesn't sound like all of that it sounds kind of appealing to me actually. But don't let the AI bosses hear me saying that.
Right, now you make me think, it's like, okay, maybe we delegate all of our work to the AI. Can we delegate all of, like, the you watch all my ads, you take care of all my ad spend for me, and I don't have any ads because my LLM gets hit with all those ads instead.
Oh wow, yeah, yeah. Or maybe the AI delegates consuming content to you.
Or, I mean, we're talking about now you have a layer between the AI content and where it's getting used. Who knows what other services might pop up somewhere in that new
Yeah,
layer.
that's very true. Yeah, but the really big thing here is that this puts Cloudflare in direct conflict with Google's ad division, and this is shaping up to be kind of a battle of the titans. I mean, I even saw in this article part of Cloudflare's strategy is actually they want to change some of the laws around AI. And how it can use information on the web. So, like, personally, that seems pretty risky to me, but I will also agree that, like, we probably do need AI related laws, not only in the US, but probably around the world. So yeah, but this is it's an interesting story. It's interesting to see how the web is being shaped by AI, and we'll definitely be covering it here more in the future.
Mm. All right, Ben. So it's the story that never ends. There is more drama in the AI staff poaching wars that we've been covering week after week in this tiring saga.
Oh
It's more
boy.
like a Greek epic at this point. And honestly, I'm basically going to start looking to launch trading cards. And I'm joking mostly, but I don't know. If I got to cover this one more week, maybe I will.
Yeah,
So
or
let's
I
let
think I think Adam, our producer right now, he's looking for ways to set up poly market futures for some of this too. So
I mean, where's the fantasy football league? Someone please out there make this. I will feature it here. Now, jumping right into the story, the recent poach is Meta has taken Apple's head of foundation models. with an offer that is frankly ridiculous. He was offered a $200 million signing bonus. And just to put that in
Wow.
context for you, that's more than Tim Cook purportedly makes. So, according to the report, Meta acquired Pang. This is the AI engineer, one of the largest packages we've seen in all of this wars, with the 200 million spread out over multiple years. So, taking the head of foundation models at Apple is a huge blow to their artificial intelligence program and another huge win for the superintelligence labs. And honestly, this goes to show that there's really no one or anyone off limits here. It's quite a temperature increase.
I'm going to reserve judgment on whether or not it's a win personally. Like honestly, this is all looking so desperate to me at this point. Like it's almost like Zuckerberg wakes up in the middle of the night in like a cold sweat after having some sort of nightmare about AI and just decides he has to throw like another nine-figure sum at the problem. And I mean, Meta also just doesn't really have that great of a track record at innovation. Like Andrew, when was the last time you thought about the metaverse?
I mean, honestly, I never really started thinking about the metaverse, but not to rag on the efforts of Meta, but I definitely think that how all this is played out in the open has made it seem a little bit too theatrical. And obviously, there's a bit of like the media and press and people like you and me talking about this week after week. But when you just look at the facts, it really is quite crazy to see what's happening back and forth between these companies right now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here in the real world, we all have constrained budgets. We can't afford a nine-figure AI budget. Andrew, I don't even think our company has a nine-figure budget for the entire company.
Yeah, if anyone listening to this has a 9 million figure budget for anything they're working on, we'd love to hear about it though.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So
yeah.
yeah, most of us are here just like trying to figure out like what's even worth investing in at this point in terms of AI. Like I don't think today is the time to double down on any sort of massive AI investment. Like it's the time for agile experimentation and opportunistic investments into productivity. So when you identify something with a lot of potential and not a whole lot of effort to implement it relative to the outcomes, that's the stuff you should be investing in today. Like don't be swinging for the fences trying to get home runs right now. Like aim for lots of small wins. Like I think that's really what the name of the game is when it comes to AI right now. And the big wins are all going to start coming when the market or as the market matures. So like just don't follow the Mark Zuckerberg AI strategy. I don't think it's going to work out for you.
Yeah.
So Andrew, who's our guest this week?
Yes. So, in just a moment, Ben and I are both sitting down with our next guest. It's Chris Westerhold of ThoughtWorks. And, earlier I mentioned waste. Well, that's what we're talking about in this discussion, waste and engineering. And no, I'm not talking about the garbage disposal kind. We're talking about that wasted effort between plans and reality. So stick around. Today, we're joined by Chris Westerhold of ThoughtWorks to unpack how engineering teams are optimizing their software development. It's easier than ever to spin up new tools and new platforms, new solutions. But for most teams, that's not what they need. We've been talking about this week after week on Dev Interrupted. They don't need more code, they need less friction.
Yeah, and our guest today has seen this firsthand. He has worked with companies that have spent countless cycles trying to improve engineering efficiency without actually, or while trying to prove that it actually works. So today we're going to discuss some strategies that make sure that you can also prove that investing into the developer experience can help you as well. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's always fun to get a chance to chat with you guys and talk about some of my favorite stuff.
Absolutely. We got a lot to cover today, some really cool stuff about how people are looking at their own engineering teams. So I want to go and dive in. The first thing is talking about how companies are spending, huge amounts of time and energy and money on engineering efficiency. But when you look closely, a lot of those same teams lack a methodology to show that anything actually improved from all of that work. And ultimately, that results in wasted effort. Why do you think understanding waste in software engineering is so hard?
I think that's kind of like the big topic of the day. And it's, I think the easiest way to describe it is there is no one way to describe waste. Like as soon as you inject a human into a process, it becomes exponentially harder. And, it's why we've been chasing this, kind of automation for years and years and years and years. Like, how do you simplify? But, waste takes, there's handoffs, there's just complexity in a problem. There is, not understanding requirements, misunderstanding requirements. There's all of these different bits that go into what really should be considered a creative endeavor in creating software. And, the bigger the problem, the bigger the team, the bigger the thing you're trying to do adds in all of these layers of complexity that are incredibly difficult to not only predict upfront, but to try to iron out. And, you've seen over the years kind of many different methodologies and ways of trying to do this, all the way back from like the Toyota way to Six Sigma to, kind of more modern ways of trying to identify kind of waste and friction. And all of them have succeeded and kind of failed in their own kind of way. But I think one of, like, all of that being said, it really comes down to what level are you trying to identify that waste. Like the more granular try to get, the harder it gets. But the higher view you take, the less impactful it is. And so, when you're thinking about identifying that waste and friction, you really have to understand what your goals are to be able to get you there. Because just trying to be better and trying to identify that waste and friction isn't really going to get you there.
Absolutely. You called out something really keen, is that, by definition, it being waste, it's falling outside of a system that you understand and control. And it's not something that is going to be neatly siloed. This isn't my pile of waste, like how you go to maybe like your source code or your project management. And you're like, this is my pile of tasks. This is my pile of code. There's no pile of waste, because waste hides everywhere. And waste, as you rightly called out, requires a lot of separate initiatives to understand where those individual bits of waste are coming from. And
Yeah. And actually, I want to point out, I think this highlights one of the core challenges of software engineering as a whole, that, I think more than just about any other profession, they deal with unknown unknowns quite a lot. Like, they don't always know what they're going to encounter when they're building something. And even when you've deployed something successfully, you don't always know if it has bugs or issues that you're going to have to address later. So yeah, I think that, kind of feeds into why waste can be so hard to identify.
I was talking to a client earlier today, and they told me that they had been working on a project for 15 months, just in the design phase. And we're not talking about aerospace building like an F-16. No, like it just in a kind of standard run-of-the-mill software. And, one of the things they were trying to remove is that kind of waste and friction, but they're trying to do it up front. And so they spent all of this time, they've been stuck in this analysis paralysis, and they're not actually getting anything out. And, I think another kind of major, like, kind of misconception or just a misunderstanding is like, there has to be a certain level of waste that you're okay with, because it kind of leans into like technical debt as well, of like, what are the things you're willing to accept versus things you're not willing to accept? And then how do you solve them when they do kind of stick their head into something? Then you're like, oh wow, okay, that's a problem. Now let's go about fixing it.
Yeah, I mean, if you spend 15 months planning, you could almost consider all of that to be waste in certain universes.
Yeah, because I mean, at what point are you, you're building a tool to solve a market problem or your user problem, those types of things. Are they really going to be able to sit and wait for 15 months or more to get that product to market? Probably not.
that's what comes to mind for me, is that by the time you've solved or created that product, the problem space has moved on. You've missed, ultimately. And so, but that itself too, just measuring by speed, can become its own kind of, like blinders. Like, we're going to fix, maybe our waste has to do with processes around our cycle time, or why these conversations take so long. People aren't aligned. Why aren't they aligned? Are there for example, in a company like that, when you ultimately discuss it as an outsider, someone not in it, do you quickly uncover like really like easy to fix problems, or are those problems often more systemic to the organization?
It a lot of them are systemic, but a lot of it tends to be like they just don't know any better,
Hmm.
or they don't have metrics that help them define what the problem actually is. Like when you go in and start working with somebody like that, like you can talk to some like random project manager, like, yeah, we've been doing this for almost 2 years. But when you think about it from an executive view or those types of things, like those things tend to get kind of, blocked from them. Like, yeah, it's green. It's on a dashboard. Everything's just fine. Like, don't pay any attention to it. Um, but the problem with waste in general is that it's never one problem. And so like just to like play forward this example, one of the issues they have is that they don't have full stack developers. And so they have front end developers, they have back end developers, they have database administrators, they have QA. And so they end up with this. I'm going to pass it from station A to station B to
Hmm.
station C. And then they just move down the process. And so when you think about it from that perspective, it becomes really difficult to remove some of that because now you're asking your React developer to understand, backend development and database design and those other bits. And so you have this kind of, you've identified this chunk of waste, but how do you actually go about fixing it? And,
Yeah.
they tend to fall in like people problems, process problems, and technology problems. And you see lots of people that will always jump to the technology problem. As technologists, we're like, yeah, we always want more technology. That sounds great. But it's almost always a people problem or a process problem. And in this space, like, how do you actually go and start training people on how to do these other bits? And, that becomes one of the really challenging parts towards transforming an organization. And you see the same thing happening in the AI space now of great. Well, we've given people all of these new technologies and new tools, but what does that process look like? And what do you need to do from a people side to be able to actually enable the
Right.
realization of that value?
Yeah, and I think I love your example of an organization that lacks like that full stack developer. Like, not only is every step of that process going to, like, every handoff that creates waste, but when you're say like on the third or fourth step down the pipeline and you have to go back to the first because you identified a problem, like that just compounds the amount of waste that you're creating on an organization. And of course, we'll talk more about AI in a moment because every episode we talk about AI at some point. But the reality is that AI may be accelerating the generation of waste within some of those steps as well, which just compounds the risk even further.
I think it absolutely does. I mean, if you're not if you're not actively trying to remove waste or tech debt or any of these other things, it will continue to grow. And whether we like it or not, code deteriorates just by sitting there. And so you're
Right.
going to need to, an organizational process, and all of these things do, you have things like Conway's Law, and everybody's heard of Conway's Law before. But when, you go in and talk to somebody, it's like, yeah, you've built all of this stuff around the way you operate. And that's not really good for you. And in back to that example I was giving, that's how their organization was set up. And so that's how they were building software. And, you have to rethink some of those things if you're going to be able to really move the needle.
So let's talk a little bit about actually moving the needle. Now we've kind of broken down waste, sources of it, ways that it impacts process and tooling within an organization. And some people look to things like automation to solve waste. Maybe if you can find ways to deploy faster or reduce cycle time, they kind of view those as like the solution to reducing waste within their organization. But often, I think many teams just need a little bit better alignment and a little bit less sprawl, like, whether that is process sprawl, like you described earlier, or some sort of tooling sprawl. So given all of this, like, how do you, as an organization, like as an engineering leader, how do you identify work that actually matters in this environment where you may have lots of sources of waste that you don't fully understand yet?
I always take these types of questions and go back to like organizational goals. And I know that feels like a big step for a lot, but like you hear lots of people talk about like OKRs and these other things, but like what are the goals you're actually trying to solve as an organization? And when you think of like young startups, they don't have a lot of money and they want to go really fast. And so you're totally fine with accumulating a lot of tech debt because you're going to have to re-platform this thing once you get your Series B or something like that. And that's okay. But then as you mature, you're less concerned about going super duper fast. You probably have a little bit more money, so you can be a little bit more focused on quality. Or maybe you're trying to completely transform your business. Like, what are the things that actually matter to you as an organization? And I see a lot of engineering teams really struggle because they don't have a North Star. Like, how do I identify the things that matter? I need to know what our goals are. What are we trying to accomplish as an organization? And then that's going to help me identify the right things to do, because you can automate all kinds of stuff. But if you're going to re-platform or do some other stuff, maybe next year, it would be silly to spend your time on some of that. And so to me, the not having that alignment, you can just see this rippling effect across an organization, especially as that organization gets larger. And, I've talked to some orgs that have 5, 10, 15,000 developers. And I would bet that if you went up to the average person there and asked them, like, what, like your work you do every day, how do you think that actually impacts the business? And a lot of them would probably say it doesn't, which has its own set of problems. But
I've been there. I've been there.
yeah, I mean, we all have, right? But if you don't have that, like, how are you going to identify the stuff that matters? You can't really.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when I was in platform engineering at a very massive company, and the latest hot technology comes out, and the CEO says, we all have to do this thing now. And it's like, but I work on platforms that don't touch that. So like, what does that mean for me?
The second bit around some of that is like, you'll hear a lot of engineering leaders say and focus around just productivity. And, there has been a severe focus on the need for faster typers, where when I know we're going to talk about AI in a little bit, but like that's been like the focus is like, oh, well, we need people to actually write more code. And I would say the answer to that, like, I think that's a false premise. Like, you don't necessarily need more code. What you need is more impact to your business. Because like the value of a line of code is essentially dropped to almost zero at this point with a lot of the other tools and everything that's out there. But, understanding what are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? What's the waste that's in your way? And, like, I think we all have been on some kind of platform team at some point in our life, but you know what? Maybe abstract away that complexity is the best thing that you can do to let your developers focus on the things that matter. Like you talked about the unknown unknowns. Like, yeah, you should be like, if it's a known or kind of a known unknown, great. Automation paths for that. Bring in your AI tools to help with it, and then allow your, really expensive engineers to go focus on the things that actually matter, not on, the things that have been well sorted inside of your organization, and then let other things focus on that. And, I think another interesting kind of misconception or misunderstanding is that like developers don't like to talk, and they do. They'll talk your ear off. Like, all you have to do is just be, come to them with good intentions and ask them interesting questions, and they'll talk your ear off, and they'll tell you where all the problems are. You just have to ask. And when you start to think about that type of thinking and that kind of like essentially continuous improvement that goes along with this different set of metrics, you now all of a sudden are doing things that are kind of twofold. If you have a good understanding of where you're going as an organization, and you're listening to your developer community to say, hey, like, tell me where the problems are. Where is the crossroads of those two things that can have a good impact towards your organization, positively impact your development community, study after study says that happy developers are going to be more productive. They're going to write better code, all of those bits. And all of a sudden you've made everyone happier, and a rising tide lifts all boats. So that but if you're a lot of those kinds of things take a serious level of leadership and organizational alignment to make that happen.
Yeah. So do you have any examples of an organization that starts to think about or wants to think about things the way that you are describing, but maybe instead of actually improving productivity, they're actually adding to the complexity of their environment?
Yeah, I see this quite literally all the time.
Yeah.
And this is the as technologists, and I kind of already mentioned this, we kind of fall in love with technology. And if you're just constantly thinking about bringing in new tech, bringing in this other stuff, and you're making your environment more complex. I met with a client yesterday, and we were talking about CI/CD, how do you kind of modernize your CI/CD platform? And I asked them a question. I was like, well, what CI/CD, what platform do you use right now? What's the thing that you're really kind of focused on? And he's like, oh, well, some teams use Azure DevOps. Some teams are using Bitbucket pipelines. Other people are using TeamCity, Octopus Deploy, Jenkins, GitHub Actions.
And the answer is yes.
Yes.
And I was like, did you just list, did you just Google, give me 10, CI/CD, and he's like, oh, no, yeah, no, I mean, this is just kind of what we're doing. And I'm like, well, of course you have a problem. I mean, it's about 2,000 developers, which is big, but not that big. And, so you now have this landscape of complexity that is hard enough for the people on those teams to be able to understand. But now you've made you have a high level of fragmentation inside of your organization. You've made it difficult for internal engineers to move from one team to another team. And you've now essentially kind of crippled yourself when it comes to being able to be nimble enough to go after the things that matter to the organization.
I actually wanted to touch on something you've mentioned, or you touched on a little bit earlier, and that's, you mentioned asking developers to figure out what would actually benefit their lives. But I wonder, how do you balance this? I always think if you ask a room full of developers, if you ask 10 developers, what's your favorite CI/CD tool? There's a good chance you're going to get 10 different answers.
Probably 12.
Yeah, 12 actually. You're right. So how do you balance this? The developers want all of the greatest technologies and they just want to adopt what they think is really cool versus we as an organization need to make sure that we are following best practices. We're standardizing things. We have happy paths that are easy to follow along with. How do you balance those two things?
Yeah, that's a really great question. But I have to give two answers to it. And so I'll have to caveat it a little bit. So when I think about, so you want to think about your early adopters. So who are the people that are on the forefront of things? And you can see this in a lot in the AI space right now. Oh, well, do we want to use Cursor, Windsurf, or n number of other things that pop up seemingly every day? There is a number of people, 10%-ish, that are going to want to just run around and use all of that stuff and just geek out on it, spend all night, try to fiddle around with it and find the best way to do it. A lot of organizations try to rope those people in. It's no, you can't do that. And it's well, no, wait a minute, hold on a second. Those are the people that are going to validate all this stuff for you. Then there's this kind of middle majority that are just tell me what to do and I'll do it. If you want to buy Cursor, great, I'll use Cursor. You want to do VS Code? Fine, I'll do VS Code. Just give me an easy path to get my job done. I am technologically literate, but I don't care. There's not enough of a reason to care. And so I think in the best organizations, you have a process that can say, let these cutting edge, bleeding edge people go do that analysis, but then gather that feedback from them and say, hey, I saw you were fiddling around with Sonnet and Claude Code. What'd you think? And if as you start to gather that information, you can now take those learnings and apply that to the middle majority and say, great, we've built a really great platform for you. We have some custom IDE plugins. We've determined based on all of this feedback that VS Code and whatever is fine. And so that's the way that you can keep essentially both of those camps of folks happy. Like that works really well when it comes to those types of tools. Where you run into problems are like CI/CD pipelines and like more kind of core fundamental things where it's like, hey, I can't have you just running and going and trying every random pipeline tool under the sun, because that brings in cost and complexity and things that are a little harder to unwind than, using JUnit or whatever, right?
You're rightfully calling out that it's less about allowing all these like bespoke developer experiences pop up within your organization. That's only going to make it harder to exchange knowledge. That's not the same as, people who are pioneering or early adopting with tools and experimenting with them and figuring out things that are going to work for your org before anyone in the world knows if they're going to work for anyone. Those are two different levels of choosing your lane, having your favorites, figuring things out, because those early adopter folks, they might, feel strongly identified with a few of the things they're picking up, but they're not like, oh, I'm JUnit or bust, like what you just rightfully called out, right? If you're in an organization has that kind of sprawl, there's a lot of opportunities to simplify, I think, the platform. And that actually really, really flows well into another thing we want to talk about with you, which is about having the right strategy to make those organization-wide engineering changes, make those platform engineering upgrades that are actually going to make an impact and not slow people down or cause a revolt, right? This is what everyone's afraid about when you make massive change for developers. And right now, AI is being used pretty interchangeably as like an ultimate developer productivity accelerant and unlock. But without platform engineering and a coherent strategy, that's ultimately chaos, and it's expensive chaos at that, right? All these queries are costing somebody money. And Chris, you've said that companies need to rethink, their systems and their platforms before bringing in new stuff to actually help them. And how do you think that actually looks like in practice? And how can a team really start?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I always like to, just as a general principle, like optimize for laziness.
Yeah.
Because like the best developer is a lazy developer. Like I don't want to do that again. It wasn't fun the first time. I don't want to do it again. Give them a path to be able to do that. And I think a good platform and a good platform strategy enables some of those things where, you have these kind of golden paths that allow people to, to be able to do things easily, but it's flexible enough for you to be able to say, hey, here's how you can modify this to make it work for you. Here's how, this kind of like centralized ownership or centralized kind of controls, but federated ownership. Like I'm just providing you with the core and allowing you to be able to go from that. Like, they're like, that's one way. Like, I always kind of bounded autonomy is another thing that I try to talk about of like, hey, well, there has to be a box. Like I can only support so many tools and so many things. And so now this is how we're going to, provide these sets of tools out from a platform perspective. They're going to be well curated. They're going to be easy to use. They're going to, kind of hook into all of the things that you would expect them to do. And the vast majority of people are going to be okay with that. And you're going to get a lot of unlock from a productivity perspective by providing people with this kind of set of tooling. The way that you kind of described the question, like a lot of people do feel like if they tell people they can't do something, it's just going to erupt in chaos. Like, but I don't think that's necessarily true. If you're, if you invoke like the EAs of old of like ivory tower, like, you shall not pass kind of stuff, like,
Right.
yeah, you're going to get some really bad reactions. But when I think of good developer experience, good platform engineering, and kind of like just a really good metrics, like just strategy overall. Like you have to do it with your community, not to your community. And so if
Yes.
you build that culture that says like, hey, I would love to have every tool under the sun. I can't. I'm sorry. I know you're a huge fan of Go, but we're a Java shop. Like I just can't have 5 random services written in this thing. Like I get it. It's a cool language. There's nothing I can do about it. And if you have an open set of conversations about those kinds of things, and you have a process for people to submit stuff, and you really build that community, and go back to like the dissent but agree, like kind of a thing where it's like, yep, I get it, don't agree with you, but I'm going to accept it and move on. Like that is the cultural impact that you have to have around all of this stuff, or everything just falls flat.
Yep.
And you end up with just chaos of tools and things, and like, there's no productivity, and just everything is just a mess. And it's really like, in the end, like engineering takes good leadership. And there's no tool in the world, there's no AI that can come in, there's nothing that can replace that kind of a thing, because it's just not easy. And that's the stuff that you have to get there. And whether, AI tools, platform tools, all of these things are going to help enable people be better, but you got to get the crap out of the way, the waste and friction. And that's done through leadership and through this kind of, continuous improvement engine and rethinking about everything.
So you're talking to a bunch of companies that, I mean, every company we talk to is asking like a pretty consistent set of questions about AI and how it's affecting, or, how to adopt it, how to measure the impact, how to make sure it's responsible, and all of that. So just from what you've seen in recent months working with various companies, what is the difference between a company that is doing a great job at incorporating AI into their workflows versus one that hasn't yet leveraged it, or has tried to leverage it and failed in some way? Like, what do you think is the main difference?
It is a difference between system thinking and tool thinking. If I've heard this once, I've heard it a million times. We've implemented Copilot, or any other tool. We've implemented Copilot, last year, and we've seen nothing. We've seen almost no impact at all. And can you come in and help us prove the impact? And I'm like, hold on a second. There's a couple of different problems here. One, like I can't prove something just because you want it to be proven. And yes, I know you've spent probably millions of dollars on this, but it doesn't mean that it's right. And, this goes back to the kind of the fallacy that I talked about before of needing faster typers, where, okay, if you're going to just bring in a code gen tool, that is predicated on the fact that I need a faster typer to create more code. And that's just not the case. And for people that are really doing really good things with AI right now, it's by rethinking value streams and systems to enable people to not only work better, but to get to better, higher quality output. Because if you look at the data, like especially some of the kind of initial data around things like Copilot, and this is not me like pointing fingers at Copilot, it's just the easy word to use. Like,
Yeah.
that, people leveraging Copilot and those types of tools, you're getting a lot higher level of bugs. You're getting higher code complexity. And I think one of the reasons for that is the fact that you're just saying, hey, give me this block of code and move on. And you're thinking about it as a one-way street in a lot of ways. And this is where like the whole vibe coding thing has come from. But like thinking about it thinking about your AI as essentially like a coding companion. Like at ThoughtWorks, we've always pushed like pair programming. And you can think a lot about an AI system as being a pair, and treating, the AI assistant that way.
Yeah.
Like, hey, ask me questions about this particular set of code, and not just, hey, give me a block of code that does X, Y, or Z. And, as you start to think about it that way, especially in like now this kind of agentic world that says like, great, well, this is an agent that I can talk to that can help me with infrastructure. This is one I can talk to about better pipelines, or about whatever, or design, or, and I can pull in all the context that I can think of from across the organization to say, hey, these are all of my design standards. These are all the ADRs around my design. Here is our kind of core, infrastructure and all of these different bits around auth N, auth Z. Now, all of a sudden, you can start to have a much more targeted and interesting conversation to say, great, how do I solve this problem? Not how do you give me more blocks of code?
Right.
And it goes back to like the value of a block of like a line of code is essentially zero now, because like I used to hire you because you knew Java. Now I need to hire you because you can solve a problem. And by redesigning these AI systems that can pair you across that for these different problems, that's where people are really starting to have success.
Yeah, I think personally, I've had the most success when I can break any challenge that I have down into a very fundamental, like component. Like, I think really what it comes down to is having a good data set to feed into an AI model that is then makes decisions within a very specific criteria. Because you really think about LLMs, they're trained on lots of data, including bad data. So just because they know a lot doesn't mean they're always going to make the right decision. But because they were trained on bad data, they're also very good at what you described with the pair programming, where when you ask them to challenge your ideas, they're much more capable of spotting where you're making bad decisions or have bad ideas. Yeah, and I think that approach, we've seen a lot of development teams have had success when they treat it more like a sparring partner rather than like something that just delivers volumes of code to them.
Well, and it goes back to like, how are you improving not like your knowledge and also creating better output?
Right.
And so again, like what is the business value and the business impact that you're trying to get to? Great. You need high quality code that is going to solve a certain set of problems, not getting code out there fast that'll, solve some of those things. That's why I've had this like personal kind of bad reaction to this focus on productivity, where it's like, yes, we all want to go faster and do more, but labeling it developer productivity just seems like a really bad marketing campaign. Like what you want is better outcomes, but you need good high quality code to be able to make that happen. And kind of the explosion of these AI tools really can make people way faster, but you're only as good as the system in which you work. And so if you're going to what's the Einstein quote, like if you're going to judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's always going to think it's stupid. And so like that kind of overlays into this. Like if you're going to put somebody into this machine that just you're constantly running in this treadmill, that's a problem. And so how do you change that dynamic? That's that type of system type thinking that you have to bring in and remove that waste, remove that friction, and then enable people to actually get the job done.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean,
It's like moving in like a different modality of being a knowledge worker. You're just working and with the information that's going in and going out in different ways. What I find whenever I'm using these new agentic tools, whether it's to code or to design something, there's so many ways that you can use it, but ultimately I partner with it in order to create the artifacts that I need to have better outcomes. Just like how you said, instead of working with the LLM in a declarative or imperative way, like do this, make this, create this, interact with it in an interrogative way. And then as you and the LLM kind of crystallize that knowledge and get really firm and really crisp on what you need and what you're building, then actually what you need to create is a really good document to put that in for a future conversation to use. The business context and the impact that you're making, you're ultimately producing different artifacts of knowledge work. And that's like a whole different modality shift. And people can only work in that kind of environment, like as you said, when they have the right tools and ability to do so.
And there's a bunch of different kind of paradigm shifts that are kind of coming along with that. Cause like we've long complained about documentation and the problems that come from that. And, there are really good, kind of LLMs that can go and analyze your code and analyze these other things to come up with better information. But, as you're moving through like the SDLC lifecycle now, and as a developer that is, creating code, why are you not saving, chat threads? Like, hey, this is the thing that I actually used to This was my logic that I was using to walk through it. Why, now with as cheap as storage is and cheap as everything else is, why would you not store some of that stuff instead of saying like, hey, like summarize this code for me and then dumping that into Confluence? Like that's not as, it's useful for some, but in this new context, like who's going to go read that? What you're going to want to do is just, type in a question in an element, it's going to go find it. Well, in this new model, you can start to save a lot of other sets of information that are going to help when it comes to solving those other problems. And it's like, hey, I need to go change code. Well, we've all been here. It's like looking at a new set of code and you're like, man, who wrote this? And then you go look at the commit message, it was you. And you're like, this doesn't make any sense at all. What was I thinking back then? And I remember early in my career, I could remember every line of code I wrote, like everything that I changed. It was just, and then you get to a certain point, you're like, I can't remember any of it. And so how do you start to think about saving all of this information to provide better kind of telemetry and observability to what happened for future you?
Yeah, a one-line prompt is not enough to improve developer productivity, right? Like there's so much context that has to go into a successful prompt that if you really want to create more code that maintains quality, that's where the meat of it is. It's like I've seen a lot of these recommendations that's like, hey, Copilot, write this test for me. And then it's like the recommendation is then paste in all the context for like the prompt. And it's like, well, that's 98% of the work,
That's
getting all that context. So, and this is like, it really, like, to tie this back to something that we talked about sort of at the top of this episode is, you mentioned that like 10% of developers that are naturally going to want to go out and experiment with new technologies, be the ones that are on the cutting edge and bring back learnings. But, there's, to me, when I hear that, I also get a little skeeved out because I start to think about shadow IT. And as somebody who used to run shadow IT, like, I can't condone the practice, but I understand why that sort of thing happens. So, to me, that kind of views one of the risks of like unstructured AI adoption. What else are you seeing as like a risk to like overall engineering effectiveness, developer productivity, developer experience, however we want to use, whatever phrase we want to use to describe this? Like if an organization doesn't have structure to the way they're rolling it out, like what are the risks that they're bringing into the company?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I actually started my career in shadow IT as well. So like, I fully understand, and I also don't condone. But one of the, like, I made a joke the other day about, kind of LLMs are giving like shadow IT weapons of mass destruction because you can, I've done some stuff with like Microsoft Access and like some like weird scripts that should have never been done, but you've now
how quickly
given
can I
them,
import it as insecure dependency now,
That's
in an
right.
instant?
You've now given people essentially, tools that can have really serious impact to an organization when it comes to security and everything else. Like if everything is run in the cloud and you're now allowing shadow IT essentially to run these things, like you have a whole nother layer of problems that you didn't have before. And there needs to be a lot more governance from a platform perspective, from a just quality and security perspective. And like, how do you, I really think that is it's stuff we've talked about for a long time, but I think this is where we're going to be forced into this particular like kind of mindset of I have to have essentially hard gates that stop something from moving into production because of the problems that can come from this. Have a data breach from some random thing that got deployed into some random cluster and the cloud that cost you who knows how many millions of dollars. Like that's a problem you're only gonna find once. And how do you stop that? You're gonna have to have those layers into there, or you're going to really, really struggle. But in the end, you also want like So I think the way you solve this, so like that was my doom and gloom version, but like, I think the way you actually solve this is by like, you have to kind of get rid of these groups. And like, I understood why you had them before, because they were generally around analytics and reporting and some like really weird, like little workflow tools. But if you can truly free up your really expensive engineers' time with, this level of kind of AI and automation and everything else, give folks like that the ability to create proofs of concept that can truly show value and be able to now say, great, look at this thing. It's really, it has these things, it has this business value, and then be able to pass that into your, traditional IT groups to get built. I think there is a way of rethinking about how really technology works inside of an organization. And, everything down from the way you prioritize projects and products and applications and do, portfolio management, but even down to like, what does a tool like Jira look like in the future? And, do you need to follow those same kind of constructs that you've had over time? And because now if it is truly that much easier and better to operate these things, which it should if you're building the right kind of systems, then great. How do you enable the folks inside of your organization that know where the problems are? How do you enable them to fix it? And you don't want them to have to fix it on their own. So great, give them an avenue in. Just like with the platforms like we talked about earlier with the, dev tools, great. It's the same thing.
Right.
It's like, hey, you can build a really cool POC and guess what? We can now take and translate that into something interesting.
Before we wrap up, Chris, where can people go to learn more about your insight and connect with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, thoughtworks.com, or carrier pigeon, email, like whatever you can find. I'd love to chat with you. I think it's always, I love to hear people's stories about what's working and what's not working inside of their organization. And, it's always like, it's always something interesting, and there's always really hard challenges to find. And, things can get better. And I always go back to the kind of Chinese adage of when's the best time to plant a tree? The right answer is 25 years ago. The second best one's today. And so when I think about measurements, metrics, removing waste and friction, just be a little bit better tomorrow than you are today. And in 2 or 3 years, you're going to look back and go, wow, we've really made some progress. And, we didn't do it through this big, messy kind of transformation. We just naturally, made things a little bit better. And I think that's really the way that, success is made.
Ben and I completely agree. And it's all about having that communication and in being able to understand, like, I can take an action right now, so I should do it. It's about doing the little things today that are going to make that huge impact for tomorrow. And, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us. We also, Ben and I and the Dev Interrupted team, we do also love to hear from folks about what they're doing inside of their own engineering teams. If anything we've covered today is really kind of close to heart to you or fascinating, or maybe you even have countering opinions, we would love to hear them. Please, reach out to us. You can reach us many different ways, like on LinkedIn, maybe on Chris's, maybe you can actually reach Chris by like Smokestack. I don't know, but if you actually manage to do that, let me know. And to you, our loyal listener, you've made it this far. We've had a really nice conversation about how teams really work. So if you made it all the way to this point, you clearly loved what we chatted about. Please be sure to like the episode, rate us on podcast listeners if you haven't already, and be sure to tune into Substack, where every Tuesday we drop this episode along with engineering news. So if you're not reading that, you're only getting a tiny scoop of the story. So we'll see you next time, and take care.